first live. Look at, I have human beings in front of me. Yesterday I was doing Coca-Cola globally to 2,000 people, all over the world. It's amazing, isn't it? And anyway, so what I'm going to talk is something about you don't know anything about because you're not under stress. This has been an easy 18 months because you've just been at home, been in the garden, going on Zoom. Zoom hasn't caused you any trouble whatsoever. But anyway, let's take a look at it. I'm going to talk about, Steve and I just did a book called The Healthy Workforce, which we're hoping to give you guys a copy of. Peter told me, but the book doesn't actually get printed till the end of October and comes out in the middle of November. It's called The Healthy Workforce. And I'm just going to do the first bit, which is really about why has well-being become really kind of significant as a topic. Incidentally, it started anyway pre-COVID, but it's been accelerated as we know. Now, let me see. Oh, you've got me up. That's wonderful. So let me give you some of the stats on this. This is, you can see this clear cut diagram. No, it's not. It's from the Health and Safety Executive. Pre-COVID, if you take a look at that round circle on the right-hand side, pre-COVID, 57% of all long-term sickness absence was for stress, anxiety, and depression. It used to be in the good old days, musculoskeletal backache and the like. That's now only 25%. And the figures during the pandemic, incidentally, by the ONS, they did figures in May of 2020, and they did it again later in 2021. That went up to about 63 to 65%. And their survey they do on well-being, looking at depression, anxiety, and all that sort of stuff, had increased during that period of time. I think it was about social isolation. It was about job insecurity, because people who are being furloughed, will I have a job when this is over? What's going to happen? It was also long working hours. It was also home bloody schooling. Listen, as a granddad, I was homeschooling one of my kids, and I found just one day a week, like a half a day a week, and I was exhausted, much more than my own work. So, I mean, we had the amalgam of things going on. So we know that it was a big issue pre-COVID, mental well-being in the workplace. Now I'm going to go back to 2008, just at 2007-8. And this was from the Sainsbury Center for Mental Health. Their economists looked at something I think is quite interesting. They didn't just look at sickness absence rates. They looked at presenteeism, people turning up to work. And remember, this is just at the beginning of the financial crisis of 2007-8 when it began and went on for at least 5. Well, I don't know if it ever stopped, by the way. Incidentally, that. But anyway, we had the financial crisis. And they found in that period of time, the economists, that presenteeism was twice the cost of absenteeism. That is people turning up. By the way, think about what we're going into now. We have 1 million people being furloughed, who've been furloughed. At the end of this month, they're no longer furloughed. There will be job losses. It's inevitable. We have organizations thinking about their labor costs. Right, the government's talking up the 1 million vacancies we have, but they're in areas quite a lot of people won't go into anyway, not British people in any case. So I think labor costs are going to be looked at. So in a way, we're going to have a similar scenario that we had in 2008. There will be downsizing. And I think it's inevitable that's going to happen because we don't have the right people to match the right jobs. So if that's going to be the case, I think we're going to see a heck of a lot more of presenteeism. So we did a big study on presenteeism over the last few years. And let me tell you what it is anyway, but you probably already know because you've seen this stuff. Basically, the model just says, very simple model. What we want, all of us want, is that top left-hand corner. We want people healthy and present. Sickness presenteeism, that is people who are ill turning up to work because they're feeling job insecure. That happened in 2008. By the way, that's been happening since 2008 all the way to where we are now, because I don't think we really came out of the financial crisis. We were coming out gradually before the pandemic hit us. So we had presenteeism, incidentally, writ large, and there have been a number of studies during the pandemic. Of course, not you lot. You didn't do this, sending emails at 8 o'clock at night, all that kind of stuff. You didn't do that because you're 9-to-5ers. You made sure when you're working from home that you were with your family, you clocked off at 5 o'clock, etc. But presenteeism did exist even during the pandemic. Healthy and not always present, that's the job dissatisfied. I'm healthy, I'm fine, but boy, leaves on the line, please. I don't want to get into Manchester. And unhealthy and not always present. That's another scenario. So we did a study of 39,000 people, and we found that only a third of people were present and healthy. It's horrendous. 28% regularly were off. This was a representative sample of the general working population in the UK. And 28% regularly were absent from work and health not very good. So presenteeism was writ large. 13% were suffering from jobs dissatisfaction and so on, and stress roughly about 24%. So it's really kind of costly. It was double the cost by the economist at the beginning of the recession. And again, it's now being calculated because we can now measure it. The CIPD measure it every year. Most organizations do it. When I have a University of Manchester, which is right across the street, incidentally, University of Manchester spin-off company, Roberts Cooper, and we measure presenteeism in organizations, and it's really a real problem area. They're turning up to work but delivering no added value. Whether it's they're turning up to work because they're ill or just turning up to work job dissatisfied, it's a real issue, and you have it when people are feeling job insecure. So writ large, we're going to have it again. There's a lot of stats. I don't want to give you too many stats because I don't have that much time. So, but these are all the kind of figures. I think the worrying figure is what the OECD found out about mental health, ill health costs, because they did it for each one of their members. And the UK loses roughly 4.5% of GDP every year. So that's pretty big when you consider what our gross national product is. It would be nice if we just got 1/4 of that back. Thank you very much. I'd be quite happy, but the costs are heavy. But I don't think it's just about costs. I think why mental well-being and health has become a big issue is what one HR director from an international bank said to me just before COVID. I said, why are you buggers getting involved in health and well-being? I mean, you're doing all sorts of things in your company. Why are you doing it? And he said, beautiful. I always wanted to write a book, Steve. I think we should do this. It's called Regrettable Turnover. I said, I don't know what that is, but tell me what it is. He says, we got, since 2008, we got become so lean and mean in terms of staff, we can't afford to lose anybody. So he meant regrettable labor turnover, losing key people. And so I think the talent retention thing is the big driver for well-being, even more than the stress-related illness, which is the leading cause of sickness absence and costing our economy roughly 36 billion a year directly. That's not the indirect cost of actually having to repair people by the NHS. So the cost arguments are there. I mean, they're pretty profound. Now I'm going to go on and take a look at a model that we looked at pre-COVID and maybe highlight how it's changed a bit. Okay, so I mean, as an academic, you never say we have enough research on what stress is and what are the leading causes of stress at work or mental ill health. But we know it. There's been 20, 30,000 studies done. The HSE has evaluated all the studies. We know what causes people to get ill at work, although there are new issues aside from Zoom. We know being zoomed out is a problem area, but that's the techno-stress bit. Okay, so the factors on the left-hand side, factors intrinsic to the job you do, the role you play, your relationships at work, career development, organization structure, and climate. So the model just says those kind of factors roughly are still there, although within the box, things have changed. They affect you, the individual, which comes out in terms of stress as individual or organizations. When I'm called in as a problem area, I'm called in because of the box at the bottom. That's the, high absenteeism, presenteeism, high labor turnover, accident rates on a construction site or whatever, right? But they're individual symptoms, they're organizational symptoms. And if we don't deal with the problems on the left, we have the problems on the right, individual problems and organizational problems, right? And then there's a box that's 6 foot long and goes 6 foot down. And that's the end of the stress process. Now we've seen stress really heavy. ONS found during the pandemic, 63% of people felt they were clinically anxious or depressed. That was in the middle of 2020. That went up to 67% later on. I think it was 67 or 65, very high. levels. And I think that was about job insecurity. That was about not the social isolation that Peter was talking about. It was about a lot of things that were happening to people in their lives. Actually being with their partners at home for a long period of time, problematic. We did have a lot of divorce rates and separations and all that kind of stuff. So so I'm going to go over each of the ones on the left quickly. Okay, factors intrinsic job, too much work, too little work. Every job is different. They have their own stress fingerprint. I've done I've done studies on about 85 different occupations, from pilots for BALPA to air traffic controllers. By the way, I did it at Manchester Airport. Sorry about that, Kathy. It was one of the first studies I ever did at Manchester Airport. It was really lovely. I was going into we're looking at air traffic controllers, the stress levels. I was doing it with some medics. So we're taking blood chemistry from the air traffic controllers. By the way, they're not a very high risk area, strange enough. Everybody thinks they are. It's because CAA every 6 months, I think, has to examine them. Isn't that right? Something like that. But I remember going in, it was really old days. It was a long time ago. And I walked in with my PhD student. They said, to train the PhD student how you're going to interview these air traffic controllers. So we go in, and I looked, and in those days you could smoke while you were looking at your screen. I couldn't believe it. So I walk over with my PhD student. The guy says, the head air traffic controller guy said, that's the guy you're going to interview. But he's just 2 minutes away from being off thing, and you can take him off. He turned around, he had 2 cigarettes in his mouth. I'll never forget that. And but anyway, they weren't very stressed, strangely enough. And pilots weren't either, although their alcohol consumption was very high when they weren't flying. Anyway, but that's another story. I don't want to get into it. I don't want to scare you all about not flying. Okay, so this is important. But what you find during recessions, and what I think we're going to go into, is people are going to be stressed not by just overload, but by too little work. When you're looking at your labor force. There's a great book called Something's Happened by Joseph Hellard. Do you remember Catch-22? Okay. He wrote, his first book was Something's Happened, which he worked in an insurance company. And the book is about somebody having a stress breakdown at work. And it's humorous, just like Catch-22 was humorous. But listen to this. I love it because I think the quotes from it are really interesting, even though they're kind of humorous. So one of his characters in the book says, this is in an insurance company, says, I am bored. This is underload. I am bored with my work very often now. Everything routine that comes in, I pass along to somebody else. This makes my boredom worse. It's a real problem to decide whether it's more boring to do something boring than to pass along everything boring to somebody else and have nothing to do at all. So it's a great book. And so you get, every job is different. When we do our 85 groups, whether we're doing teachers or managers or doctors or nurses, we've done all of those. We've done 85, and really the stress fingerprint for a particular occupation is pretty robust. Oh, this was the pilot. This is Manchester. This is Manchester Airport. This is what we found when we did it. We published these papers in the medical journals. These were the factors that predicted high risk, because we took blood chemistry and we're looking at their fibrinogen in their blood. Fibrinogen is the thing that you emit when you're under a lot of stress over a period of time. You do fibrinogen, because what happens is the bad biochemistry starts damaging your coronary arteries. So fibrinogen comes to repair it. When it repairs it, it starts to build up artery. That's what blocks your arteries. So it's a really good, interesting measure of somebody about to suffer a heart attack. This is depressing, isn't it? This 9 o'clock in the morning talking about this. Anyway, these are the kind of factors when we're looking at air traffic controllers at Manchester, but many, many years ago. Of course, it's all changed. Manchester Airport is absolutely wonderful. That's not a problem at all. Role you play, how much control and autonomy. This has been an issue for a long time, huh? Engagement movement, right? Haven't we had engagement? And you all measure engagement. How rubbish is that? And you go from 82% to 84%, and boy, engagement's really improved. We thought that was the HR magic bullet. It isn't, because it's about it's the macro issues in a workplace. It's just not just about how they're engaged. We got on this engagement. I'm not saying there's nothing wrong. Engagement is fine, but it's not going to solve our productivity issue. Of course, Steve is going to talk about productivity. But our productivity has not been good, as Steve will show, was tied 7th, I think, in the G7, 17th in the G20. It's not exactly, although it's not a particularly great measure. You'll read that in our book. as we say, talk about how you measure it. But anyway, the role you play, a lack of control and autonomy, I think, is one of the issues. How do we give people more autonomy? Isn't that great? So I was listening to the radio coming in today, Radio 4. I don't know if you heard it. The guy from the investment bank, like the Goldman Sachs guy who said, everybody has to come in the office. There is no working from home. I just heard the same thing again from another investment banker. And then the interviewer said to him, aren't you a dinosaur? Yeah, he is a dinosaur. And he said, yeah, if you let people to work flexibly, they're only working half time. As if we didn't work. And Steve will again show you what we did during the pandemic, that our productivity did not suffer as of its working. And in some industries, I think it went up quite dramatically. And we will know that over the coming months. We all know that. You know, you were working very hard as well. I like this. This is, I like this illustration of control, again, from Heller's book. He says, one of his characters says, what would happen if deliberately, calmly, with malice aforethought and obvious premeditation, I disobeyed? I know what would happen. Nothing would happen, and the knowledge depresses me. I suppose just about impossible for someone like me to rebel anymore and produce any kind of lasting effect. I have lost the power to upset things that I had as a child. I can no longer change my environment or disturb it seriously. They'd simply fire and forget me as soon as I tried. Control and autonomy is important. And what flexible working does, forget hybrid, flexible has been around anyway. I did a book, an academic book with scholars across the world, an edited volume, which came out, fortunate for me, in May of 2020. But we're looking at all the science on flexible working in North America, in China, all over the world, all right? The evidence was clear. Flexible working delivered to the bottom line, increased job satisfaction, where you could work flexibly. If you're an air traffic controller, you can't work flexibly, right? If you're a nurse or a doctor in a hospital, you can't work flexibly. But for those who can, the evidence pre-COVID was overwhelming that it was better for the bottom line, job satisfaction, retaining people, and the like, all right? So we've accelerated, as Peter said, and this is an important development that we do that. But if we're going to do it, let's do it right. And doing it right is what PwC, I think, is doing, which I think this is what they're doing. To say we're going to operate the 2 to 3 day model is pretty stupid. So the model is we expect you in 2 days a week. Why? What 2 days? Why don't you just say to them, given your role, given what we need from you, in other words, the psychological contract, what suits you and what suits us is X. And it might be for young people, they say, we're just out of university for 2 years or college or whatever, we want to come in 4 days a week, or most of the time, because that's where we learn from, socialize, meet our partners, everything to do with that. And other people who live in Wilmslow in Manchester will say, hey, I don't want to commute in an hour and a quarter to get in. Forget it. I have 2 young kids, take them to school. Let me come in when I need to come in. Why can't we do that? I mean, I don't understand why we have to either mandate you have to be in the office or mandate you have to be in 2 days a week. People will come in for social needs anyway. You don't have to say that to them. They'll want to meet their colleagues. They'll need the team build and the like. So I think we have a long way to go in this flexible working. We're just learning in a way how we're going to do the hybrid model, as we're learning in just doing this session. And almost every conference from now on over the next year is going to be like this: 20 or 30 people in a room, 200 people online. Hey, that's the way it's going to be. And that's fine. Let's see how we get on with it. But I mean, that is fine. Oh, I just show you about the dent. I did a big study for the British Dental Association many years ago. And as you can see, we found these are the factors that influence it. It wasn't about standing in front of people doing teeth. Do you know what it was about? It was about relationships, because it hadn't been trained on how they manage people. We know you love going to dentists, so you know you'll even call up your dentist and say, "Geez, you haven't got in touch with me," right? We all hate going to dentists. I just been there last week. I hate it because I have this kind of fear, you know, oh God, I think the pain and everything else. But it was quite interesting. It was all about relationships when we did this for the BDA. So now a lot of dental schools train people on how you manage patient fear and everything else. We found that the biggest predictor of ill health among dentists, perceiving the dentist as an inflictor of pain, and therefore they're anxious when they come. How do you like that one? Weird. But anyway, Relationships at work, very important. This is the last Heller quote I'm going to do. Relationship with boss being the most significant thing. Pre-COVID, the evidence is clear. The person that causes you the most stress at work is your line manager. No question about it. And the evidence is pretty overwhelming. I did a study where we evaluated all for the HSC years ago. We were looking at hours of work. We were looking at the line manager. Line manager is the big one. I run the National Forum for Health and Wellbeing at Work, made up of 40 global employers from Microsoft, BT, BP, Shell, goes on and on, all right? And when we had our first meeting 3.5 years ago, it's a voluntary organization made up of HR directors and chief medical officers. When we had our first meeting, we decided to prioritize what are the issues about health and well-being that are the most significant. Number one issue is your boss, i.e. the line manager. Everybody said, if you have an EQ'd line manager, an emotionally intelligent line manager with social interpersonal skills, you won't have half the problems. Your books won't sell, Cooper, right? And we don't do that because what do? We recruit and promote people based on their technical skills, not their people skills. Unless you guys in HR get that, understand how important that is. In your selection of the future line managers, there should be parity between their technical skills and their people skills. We don't really do it. And that's what is really critical, I think, from the point of view of the kinds of issues Peter we're talking about. And that's what my national forum said was the most important issue. We then brought in a leading academic globally in this area, reviewed all the evidence, and it was the line manager that was the problem. And it really is the real the biggest challenge we had. Interestingly enough, you know what the second biggest issue we looked at? These are, again, really top C-suite people. Emails, they said, was causing damage. And now we can throw in Zoom with that. In other words, technology. The reason being is because people were always on. So, you know, otherwise, you know, the EU is moving in the direction of what France has done, which is the right to disconnect. And I think we have an issue with emails. And when I looked around, we talked about it. This group actually does we do things. We don't just sit and talk. We developed a 3-page guide on what all companies should do when it comes to emails. Is that right, Tony? Tony used to sit on this group, still does. And we developed this kind of guide of what you should do. But when I asked everybody around the table, how many of you have guidance? It was only, I think, 1 or 2 that said they did. None of them did. And it's a big issue because you're interfering with people. Oh yeah, I heard somebody say recently to me, he said, yeah, you're right about the emails thing. So, and this is a senior guy, he says, I always send the email off on a Friday afternoon, a lot of emails, says, but I tell them not to access it until Monday morning. Huh? Excuse me? Your line manager tells you that? Could you deal with this issue? And you're gonna have a nice relaxing weekend? It's the dumbest thing I ever heard. So again, we have an issue of that. There's a whole load of issues on this, but that's one of them. Relationships at work, boss, big one. Okay, listen to this. I love this. This is the opening paragraph, and I'm not going to do Heller anymore. This is the opening paragraph of it, of his book. This is why I love this book. And remember, he worked in an insurance company for 10 years before he wrote Catch-22. Anyway, in the office in which I work, there are 5 people of whom I am afraid. Each of these 5 people is afraid of 4 people, excluding overlaps, for a total of 6 people who are feared by at least 1 person. This is the opening paragraph of his book. In my department, there are 6 people who are afraid of me, and 1 small secretary is afraid of all of us. I have 1 other person working for me who's not afraid of anyone, not even me, and I'd fire him quickly, but I'm afraid of him. The thought occurs to me often that there must be male clerks, office boys, assistants, managers of all ages who are afraid of everyone in the company. There's 1 typist in our department who's going crazy slowly, has all of us afraid of her. Her name is Martha. Our biggest fear is she'll go crazy on a weekday between 9 to 5. We hope she'll go crazy on a weekend when we aren't with her. Now, it's humorous, but it's about relationships, and relationships are important. We realized that during the pandemic, didn't we? How we were missing our colleagues, some, and some we weren't missing at all, right? So relationships are kind of critical. Career development, job security, we're going to have this problem of job security. We know we're going to have this, is what's coming with the furloughing, stopping, and everything else. Look at what happened during the crisis. This is CMI report during the crisis. Take a look at from 2008 from September to March, look at the job security when they were, the economists, CMI, were taking a look at levels of job insecurity in the financial crisis. We're going to get this. So how we, again, this is now critical that we have these EQ managers. So what is the EQ? What is the line manager of the future from shop floor to upper have to be concerned about? How do we do the hybrid working? How do we manage people? Some are going to be at home. Some are going to be in a central office. Like we're trying to do this in the conference, like we're doing it everywhere. Don't we need somebody who's got those skills now more than ever before? Okay, so that's one. If mental ill health is the leading cause of sickness absence in the UK economy, costing billions, 36 billion, probably a hell of a lot more when you add in the NHS to that. How are we going to recognize when people aren't coping and have unmanageable workers, particularly when they're going to try to hide it because they're worried about their job security? How are we going to do that? So boy, oh boy, if the line manager isn't the number one issue we've got, and do we do anything about it? Across the street is my workplace, Manchester Business School, okay? Do we, at Manchester, do any of the business schools actually train our MBA students to manage people? No, it's all cognitive. It's, here are the concept of HR, marketing, ops management, finance, accounting. It does not do experiential training. The movement is in that direction now, by the way, because unless we try to develop the person, we're going to lose, because we're going to put out people who are cognitively literate, but from an interpersonal point of view, not what we need for the future, and that's what we need in the future. This happened during, I love this. This happened during the finance crisis. This was in the Buffalo News. The bad news, Johnsons, you're being let go. The good news, you can have your old job back at half your former pay. I can't live on that. The rest of the good news, we can offer you a second job also at half your former pay. I'd offer you a third, but I'm afraid of overheating the economy. So that was just a humorous thing about the job insecurity thing that occurred during the finance crisis. Organizational structure and climate, really important. How do we create the right kind of culture? Well-being is the answer. During the pandemic, I got a phone call from the US, from a headhunting firm who only does C-suite, one of the top headhunting firms in the United States. They called me up and said, Professor Cooper, here's our problem. We're getting tons of inquiries for a CWO. I said, who the hell is a CWO? A Chief Wellbeing Officer. American companies want them now. What does it look like? Right? Where does it sit in the organization? Does it report to HR director? Does it go to the chief medical officer? Does it go directly to the CEO? What is it? What is this role? By the way, we have it in the UK. We don't call it that. We call it Director of Health and Wellbeing. Usually reporting, it's weird. Some report directly to the CEO. I can think of a construction company where it does. Others report to the HR director or to the chief medical officer or to health and safety. So we have to get some clarity where this role should be, right? It's not as strong as I think the Americans want it. They want it board. And there's a company I deal with where we go to the board once a quarter with the chief exec and all his team, big global company, and they have on their agenda for 1 hour, health and well-being. It's coming more, and we need it on the annual reports as well. So the annual report should have on the annual report the level of stress-related ill health. There's a whole load of things they should have that are linked to the health and well-being of our employees. Not on the sustainability report, because nobody reads that, I'm afraid. It's sad, but it isn't read. And stakeholders want to see, we want to engage stakeholders in saying, hey, let's action what you guys always say, which is the most valuable resource we have is our human resource. Well, let's do it. If we really value them, give them more flexible working, truly flexible. Let's own up to where we're not delivering and where we are delivering and do something about it. So it's become, in a sense, what's happened, I think, in the well-being space, it's become now strategic. My university spinoff company has grown exponentially during this last 18 months because companies now understand that health and well-being is critical for the future to retain people, particularly the millennials. We'll go back to the job retention thing. Interface with the outside world, really a big issue in the well-being space. I'm just looking at my watch so that Steve doesn't kill me. Really kind of important. What do you do with it? And this is something I did for the EU, European Foundation for the Improvement of Living and Working Conditions, an EU agency. I did their stress program, but it still applies now to well-being, which is organizations should be auditing their staff regularly on well-being. We have the psychometric tools to do that. It's easy peasy, not complicated. You can find out how employees perceive their health and well-being, their line management, the senior management, the hours they work, the flexible working, everything. We do that. Presenteeism, you could do that. Good psychometrics. Training people, resilience training, mindfulness, a lot of stuff on resilience training. I did a meta-analysis of all the studies in the world with Professor Ivan Robertson, which was published in one of the top journals. Resilience training does work. So you're arming so the first one is finding out the organizational problems. The second one is how do we help the individual? And that's what secondary is. How do we train up? What do we do? Resilience training seems to work when you look at the studies done. And then tertiary is all about EAPs and stuff like that, which is almost all your companies probably have anyway. Evidence from the CIP in 2018 and in the 2021 one, roughly the same. It's delivering to the bottom line. PwC delivering to the bottom line. This is the bottom line issue now. The evidence is getting clear. It's in our book. So look at it. It's no longer just soft, fuzzy stuff. It's not, nice to have. It's a must-have. You want to retain good people and get the most out of them and get the productivity levels higher. This is not what flexible working is about. What well-being is about. Boss, tomorrow is the mandatory meeting on employee health and well-being. The meeting starts at 6 a.m., so it will interfere with your sleep and not your work. Doesn't that send a message that work is more important than health? I hope so, says the boss. That's the theme of the meeting. Healthy employees are unproductive. They're always exercising or eating fruit when they should be working. We prefer employees who work hard and die before their pensions start paying out. Suddenly I feel sick, right on schedule. When I heard that interview this morning on the Today program, I was really appalled that somebody would say, if you allow people to work flexibly, then they're only working half time. I think that was really horrible. Like we didn't do anything all this time that we were working from home. And God, it's just horrible. Yeah, there are nobody, even the research that we did, the book I did, never ever did we get in any region of the country, people wanting to work more than 2 or 3% wanting to work 100% remotely. That's not what flexible working is. It's not about remote working. It's different. So the hybrid model is there. The line manager is important. Well-being is a strategic issue at the board level, on the annual report, unless we start to do all this stuff. And many, many companies are doing it. If you look at some of the companies on isn't that right, Tony? Some of the companies on our National Forum for Health and Welfare, big boys. Unfortunately, it is the big boys. The problem I think we have in this arena is the SMEs, who employ more people than the big boys. But we need to have this as a strategic issue from a productivity point of view, but also the health and well-being of our staff. So I'll leave it there. Otherwise, Steve will kill me. And then I can open it to some questions. Yeah, go ahead.
It was a really interesting report. And it seemed to be employee part of this, because I think straight away there's a little bit more humility and they just go being a little bit more kind of honest in terms of trying to figure this out.
Yeah, go ahead.
Good.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that trend is still happening now. So there was almost a novelty factor in the first lockdown, and the second lockdown and what's happened since. I think we've seen a dip as well. And
in the trusting of employers, you mean?
The employees trusting their leaders.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there was a great increase, and there was an increase in engagement as well for a short period of time as well, because suddenly we've got to get everybody on Zoom, we've got to make sure everybody's well, and a genuine desire, I think, most people saying, are we all okay? That's now diminished. This has almost become the norm. And like anything, if you increase expectations and then don't maintain them, that trust is going to fall even further than where it was before.
That's a good observation. I think you're right, because what you found about line managers is they were contacting their direct reports a lot more during the pandemic than they would have pre-pandemic on a one-to-one basis. Because we all said good practice is, if you're a line manager from shop floor to top floor, make sure you find out what they're feeling, what's going on other than about their work. You know, what's happening with your family, sharing it. And I think there was a lot of camaraderie then. You know what I think now, why it's going the other direction, I suspect you're right about it going the other direction, is because people are worried about their jobs. If they're worried about their jobs, they know the people at the top, what are they going to do? They're going to look at the labor cost. How are we going to be more competitive? How can we get rid of people? How can we put them on top part-time work? Do we need the million furloughed people now? I think that's what's driving that. And then they'll go into the different mode. The senior people go into different mode, rather than it being, we're all in this together because we're all vulnerable. We were vulnerable to dying, to the health threat. And when you're in that kind of scenario, you become more humane and more human. And I think what's happened is that now, well, that's kind of over. It's not over. I don't understand why people think it's over with 40,000 people, 35 to 40,000 every single night on television, with 130 people dying every day. I don't know why everybody thinks this is over. It's not exactly over. But nevertheless, you're right. We're trying to go back to some normality. And I think that's what employees are worried about. We'll see whether these people learned a lesson or not. Have the senior people in industry learned a lesson? Have they realized that, you know, if we look after our people, it'll deliver to the bottom line. If we value and trust them, try to negotiate with them on a psychological contract, what works for us, what works for them, and come up with something. I think we'll go far. Will we have short memories? What you're saying is we may, and I hope not.
Hearing people like the guy on the radio this morning, people then pick that out and go, oh God, the tax is going to go back, so we should be doing that, rather than them being the exception.
What they don't realize that my students will say to me, and have said to me, as I've been coming back a day or two a week, they've been saying to me, no, I'm not going to go work for an organization that's going to be flexible working. Do you know what? The millennials are going to determine the best employers. You want to retain the millennials? Then, and they're not snowflakes. They're just not prepared to do what their fathers did, which was stick with an organization that was crap. The command and control culture. That's not what they're prepared to do. Their parents were prepared to do that for them paying the mortgage and school fee or whatever they had to pay for. This generation won't do that. And you may call them snowflakes, but they're doing the right thing. They're voting with their feet and saying, I want a good quality of, I'm going to work hard for you. Don't worry about that. But I want a good quality of working life. Yes.
Thanks. Hi, it was a very interesting presentation. Thank you. But I had a question. You said that engagement wasn't going to solve the productivity challenge. Obviously, I felt my 20-year career in HR and working on engagement crashing down around my ears there. Putting that personal crisis aside, I was interested if you could possibly expand on that a little bit for us, please. What you meant by that?
Well, I just think that, you know, we all look for a magic bullet, don't we? I think we went through the engagement era. Hey, come on, engagement's really the critical #1 dimension. And we're going to measure it. And every year we're going to give the figures, and we're going to delegate them down to every little subunit in the organization. And you know, we expect you to do this, that, and the other. What really affects people when they go into the workplace is, to some extent, being engaged in helping to make decisions. Yes, particularly for a job. Yes, it's about having a line manager that manages them by praise and reward, not fault finding, right? It's not having a culture where it's long working hours and they feel they can't leave till 7 o'clock, right? Of somebody sending them an email on a Friday night or Saturday or when they're on holiday. Do you know what I mean? It is about the quality of our working life. Think about what it is that makes us engaged, motivated in the workplace. It's not just about engagement. That is one aspect of it, but there is no magic bullet. Unless you look at it strategically, you do well-being audits. You talk to employees about how you can improve it. We have the psychometrics to do this. I do this. My university that does this all the time. We develop a strategy out of that, and we work with the senior people, HR director, or chief medical officer, or both. That's the way you do it. It's a strategic issue now, health and well-being, if you want to retain people and get the most out of them, particularly with the triple. The triple is the health crisis is still there. We're going to go into what will be not a major, but look at last month. It was 0.1% growth. So we're going to have, I think, a recession. It won't be as bad as 2008, but we will have it because of the downsizing and everything. And the third one is Brexit. All right, we have a challenge, and managers really have to come to the plate on this, and senior leaders. Will they? Will they not see this as a bottom line issue? The younger generation are. The younger generation of senior people see this. And I'm really pleased because my national forum, we don't get paid, right? We don't have any money. We formed 3.5 years ago, and these are HR directors, chief medical officers, directors of health and well-being, senior people giving up their time to do this. Why? Because they care. I think that's the good news. Yes.
I think it was the previous, oh, thank you. On the previous slide, you talked about the 3 levels of intervention and the secondary one about helping people to cope.
Yes.
I think one of the challenges is going to be, because people are more remote, actually helping them remotely is going to be a lot more difficult than when you had people perhaps in an office and were able to support. And I don't know if you've got any views on how we might be able to achieve that.
Well, I mean, the secondary will be training line managers. Look at HR's job is, if I go to a company and I talk to an HR director of an organization, I'll say, tell me about your managers. Do you know who are the good ones in terms of people management skills and who are the lousy ones? What I tend to hear from people is something like, from HR people, is the following. They'll say, we have about 30, maybe 40% of our people are really naturally good at people management skills. 40% are potentially good. They're promoted on the basis of their technical skills, but 40% are trainable, are good. And then they'll say something like, they don't say it quite this way, but they'll say 20% are untrainable. In other words, you know, and I think that's a way to go. Let's train the ones that need the training. Let's be honest about what we have to do. In HR, I think what we have to do is we have to do a well-being, we have to do not a well-being, an audit of all our managers from shop floor to top floor. Find out what their skill base is, where they need the training, who have it naturally, and don't bother with them. They're great, they do a good job. Every indicator is people don't have high sickness absence in their thing. They're a top performer. Leave them alone. Don't have to do anything with them. Train the ones who need training. What do you do about the ones? And we have them. Everybody does. We have it across the street. I have it we all have it. There'll be people who have been promoted on their technical competence, but are really bad at people management. What do we do with them? How do we reconfigure this for them? Because I think we need to do something about that. We have to take tough steps. And for people like Armstrong Craven, and for anybody recruiting new people, ensure there's parity between their people skills and their technical skills in the future. Do not send somebody who's technically competent somewhere, but you don't know what the hell they did to people to get there on the way. I think that's fundamental. Yep, Elena? Last question, because I need to. I want to message you by bringing
hiring for competence and firing on character, that we are shifting on hiring on character and firing on conscience. And I want to give you an example from the research we did, which led to the loss of 150 people in the Germanwings air crash, when the co-pilot purposefully crashed the plane because he was suffering from, obviously, psychosomatic stress and other mental conditions. And it was known that he was unhealthy. And yet the German law prevented the doctors making his condition known to his employer. So if we move to this future of work and we take on board all the important advice you're giving us, Cary, I think there is something that needs to be said about the way we cultivate character, how we also embed in resilience conscience, and how we update the law to protect us from the sickness that well-being can also provide.
Yeah, I think the good news, Elena, is that if you look at the health and safety executive, I was just talking to some senior people at the HSE, very senior people, and they're really into this agenda. That well-being is big. Public Health England, big, Tony. It's here. And for a whole variety of reasons we just mentioned. From a bottom line point of view, forget the sickness absence rates, which are appalling, stress-related sickness absence rates. It's how do we retain good staff and how do we retain and attract other ones? That should be a competitive edge. I want to work there. You know, I have a daughter who was in marketing, and she'd come back and say, I said, what are you leaving? You've only been there 18 months. What do I want to be there for? It's a dreadful organization to work for, Dad. I've gone to this one because I think they have a better I have better quality of life if I'm with them. I don't need this. I have a young family. I don't need this. Anyway, we'll see what happens. Thank you very much. And I'm going to turn over to my colleague. Yep, finish.
There's a couple of questions on the live stream. Can we just take one of those as well?
Yeah, sure. I'm sorry. We should.
No, that's all right.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, Cary. Got a question from Sean. Question is, how do we balance autonomy, new flexible working patterns with overworking? For example, 4-day working weeks, likelihood it'll end up with people trying to cram 5 days work into 4 days, so long working hours or stress has increased.
Yeah, by the way, I think that did happen during the recession. During the pandemic, don't you think? I mean, I noticed I was working longer. I had to figure my own routine out, right? Because I was working, obviously, 100% from home during many, many months. I think we have to learn how to do this, and we have to clock off, don't we? We have a whole, I did a little paper on that actually for the university and elsewhere, what I thought would be good ways of doing this, but we have to treat it. So I used to get dressed up, you know, not in a suit like I have, but this is the first time I've worn my suit, by the way, in 18 months. Do you believe it? I should have come in my jeans, which I normally wear, and had to get a routine for myself. So did my wife. And I think it's important to do that, to get a routine so we don't overwork, because that's not good. I mean, if you're working flexibly, then, you know, but on the other hand, you don't want to have the right to disconnect, which says that we close your servers down, as Volkswagen do at their headquarters at 5:30. Or have the right to disconnect law, which says you can't access people, which you have in France, it's a law, at night, at weekends. The reason I say that is you have flexible working, you might want to go pick your kids up from school at 3:30, pick them up, read with them, and then do work in the evening. That's what it's about. But working long hours is not healthy for you. For the HSE, I did a meta-analysis of all the studies that had been done. And we found there was a strong relationship. If you consistently, not in any one week, consistently work long hours, you'll get ill. Simple as that. The evidence is pretty overwhelming. I did a book on it, an edited volume with all the academics, again, globally. It's called The Long Working Hours Culture. And it has the evidence there.